Welcome back to the second hour of News and Views on Salam Media. It's just gone 11 after 9 o'clock, and we're now going to be talking with Zaki Mamdu. He is the coordinator of the Stop EACOP campaign, and as I've indicated just now, EACOP stands for Communities and Activists Protest Against the East African Crude Oil Pipeline, and that is in Hoima and in Kampala. Now, the last time I spoke with you, Zaki, if memory serves me correctly, I think we spoke about the Palestinian situation. And of course, that story will still continue with all of us till the genocide does eventually end. But I see that your focus has changed ever so slightly. But I guess it's not about a change in focus. Once an activist, always an activist. So you will then take up the cudgels of any fight regarding activism is concerned. So tell us about this new campaign, this new EACOP campaign.
Absolutely. Assalamu alaikum. Thank you for having me on the program, and good morning to the listeners as well, the viewers. So look, the Stop EACOP campaign and this global fight to confront the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline project is certainly, like the fight against the genocidal Israeli state. It is a decolonial, anti-colonial fight against the brutality, of the imperial and capitalist system. It is a fight against the neo-colonial plundering and pillaging of our continent in order to, line the pockets of a multinational elite and serve the energy interests of countries abroad at the absolute expense of communities on the ground. And so, what we are seeing in Uganda and Tanzania with the construction of the East African crude oil pipeline, which is a project which is primarily spearheaded by Total Energies, as well as CNOOC. CNOOC is the Chinese National Offshore Oil Corporation. And they intend to build what would be the world's longest heated crude oil pipeline through from the Great Lakes region of Uganda, from northwestern Uganda, down to the coast of Tanga in Tanzania. And they would use that pipeline to pump in Uganda's oil reserves and ship it overseas for export, to serve the energy needs of countries abroad. But of course, what comes with it is huge and immense environmental and socioeconomic costs to ordinary people. I mean, already tens of thousands of people have been displaced from their land, forcibly removed, threatened, and intimidated into signing compensation deals which are really inadequate and improper, and have lost their land, have lost their livelihoods, have lost their ability to put food on the table for their families, to send their children to school, to access quality healthcare. And so what is happening is communities are rising up and communities are coming forward. Yesterday, there were hundreds of people who came out in Hoima district, which is one of the impacted regions in Uganda by this pipeline, but also its associated oil drilling sites. And they came out to protest. They were intending to hand over a letter of demands, and in that letter outlining numerous grievances with the livelihood restoration program and with the compensation, but also simply calling for the EACOP project to be scrapped, to be done away with, calling for reparations for the immense harm that's already been caused, and calling for the Ugandan government, but also their developmental partners, to prioritize investments into decentralized, community-led, and socially owned renewable energy alternatives to these mega fossil fuel projects like the EACOP pipeline. At the same time, there was a delegation of community members from impacted communities who went to Kampala and led a protest in Kampala, which was brutally squashed by the security forces, and 21 people were violently arrested yesterday and beaten and are still being held currently in the central police station in Kampala. While the community members in Hoima, the many of the community members who you're seeing on your screen now, they were surrounded as soon as they got to their gathering point, and they were refused, and they were not allowed to proceed with their peaceful demonstration. to the EACOP company offices where they intended to hand over their letter. And they were forced back onto their buses, and they were and sent back to their various villages and communities, as it were.
So, Zaki, let's look at the issue around meaningful engagement. Why are these people not allowed to hold peaceful protests? That's number one. I'm also wondering about these governments, the Ugandan government, being possibly, because of these agreements that they've signed with these energy companies, Total being one of them. There's already been a lot of investment from both sides. Is there anything at all that can be done to perhaps recoup those investments? And then what about these displaced people that you referred to? Were they compensated in any way at all? Because this was the modus operandi of big companies in the past, by silencing people, by giving them vast sums of money. Not rare, or the people receiving the monies don't look at the situation long term and think, well, this money, to them, it seems like a huge sum of money, but it's only going to last me for a couple of years. What happens thereafter? So there's supposed to be all of that education that goes on as well regarding their interest, their saving, how to utilize the money, and where to from there. How can they be, should they be, must they be relocated in an area where they can start up trade and survive as well? So meaningful engagement is what I'm really asking about.
Yeah, so I mean, there hasn't been. If you obviously speak to the proponents of the project and to the officials at Total and at CNOC or within the Ugandan Petroleum Authority, they will of course say yes, they've engaged with the communities. The communities are incredibly happy. EACOP is coming and giving them jobs and opportunities. But that's just the usual nonsense that the fossil fuel industry spews. It's the usual nonsense that oppressive governments put out there, which does not reflect accurately the situation on the ground. And I've been to Uganda, I've been to these communities and visited them, and I've sat down with them and spoken to them. And the reality of their qualitative lived experience is exactly the opposite. And so there was a compensation program that was implemented, and for many years, in fact, over the last decade already, it was kind of in place, and communities was receiving this compensation. But the issues are that they had no option to say no. Their land was forcibly taken, so they were intimidated into signing the compensation agreements. The compensation rates were given at rates which were outdated, and so the amount of money was certainly not enough, and didn't reflect the rate of inflation and the true value of their land as well. So there were many issues in many communities with people's crops and people's land not being evaluated properly, and so they weren't receiving enough. And then there are other issues where still, even though people have lost their land, many people have not been compensated yet. Total will say that they've compensated 96% of impacted people, and they'll tout that as a huge achievement. But it's absolutely not, because 100% of people have been pushed off of their land. And some of the other issues we find with it is, what they've done in households and family structures where you could have 10 or 15 people living on a plot of land, cultivating that land, adding value to that land, and contributing to the ways in which those families and communities sustain themselves. You have one person in the household who Total and the government has identified as the landowner, as it were, who gets the compensation. And so entire family structures are disrupted, and many people have been left out, and they've unable to now stay on that land and cultivate that land, don't have enough money to buy new plots of land, don't have enough money to find other ways to generate an income, and engage in other local economic activities and all of that. And so there is a serious socioeconomic crisis in Uganda and in Tanzania as well. where tens of thousands of people have lost their land, they've lost the forms of sustenance that that land provides, and they've lost the income generating streams that that land has historically provided them. And the money the money that has been given just hasn't been enough. Certainly not enough for them to rebuild their lives, let alone improve them in any significant material way. And then, that much is glaringly obvious in the way in which communities are coming out to protest, to demonstrate, to raise these concerns, to say, that their lives are significantly harder and more difficult as a result of the imposition of this project. And then what you have is the police forces, security forces, really just coming out with a heavy hand and brutalizing demonstrators, squashing resistance, and doing that to serve the interest not of the Ugandan people, but to serve the interests of these multinational corporations and of Museveni's authoritarian regime.
When you look at the situation, when you look at the African continent, I guess it happens in the Middle East as well. You do know that I'm now coming from a social a point of social cohesion within these families. Oftentimes, it's a couple of generations, 2-3 generations living together. They don't have the nuclear family system that the Western world adopts. And you spoke about these companies or their recruiters identifying a particular person within that family structure. The money is handed over to him or her, and that's the time, sadly, when greed does then creep in, and that entire family system is broken down because that person may not be responsible enough with the money, or the money may not be enough to then rehouse this entire family, this extended family of 20, 30 or more people. These families in the rural areas are really a community on its own, because there's a lot of intermarriage that goes on there as well. So you're talking about a family structure of 30 plus people, maybe even 50 plus people, that has been completely destroyed, and leaving the family socially absolutely bankrupt. And how do they start up again? You may have a few of them that might have the necessary skills to move on and try and eke out a living somehow or the other, but the rest of those families are left absolutely destitute. So a social plan should have been looked at here as well, as how to take this entire community or this entire family, which comprises this little community, and kind of replace them or relocate them where they can have similar or better circumstances, and don't break down the fabric of that family's, the social togetherness or social harmony of that family. And that's a big issue, is it not? Because it's really about their identity. It's about their identity, and identity is tied in with their land as well.
Absolutely. I mean, the ways in which a project like EACOP, and we see it across the African continent, the way in which these projects are developed is just entirely culturally inappropriate. And it doesn't account for these things that you very correctly pointed out here. And I mean, the major issue is that the compensation simply has not been enough at all. It hasn't been adequate. It's calculated on historical rates, which don't match today. Land hasn't been valued properly. But, in this situation where they're identifying one head of the household, as it were, and providing compensation to them, what you find is that women have been entirely left out, and are not receiving the compensation, and in some cases, then the male heads of the household, for a short time, run off with what seems like a lot of money, and leave women to try, with no means now, to try and hold their family together, and to do the care work, and provide for the kids, and all that it may be. And I mean, in other instances as well, they've provided compensation in the form of relocation. And I've been to, there's a community which is now the oil refinery resettlement village, where they moved thousands of people off their land and tried to put them up in a resettlement village that they had built. But even there, it's just built in a way which is just entirely culturally inappropriate. So previously, you would have had families staying on plots with the extended family and with others, and now moving those entire big families into very closely packed together little houses, which are 2-bedroom houses or 3-bedroom houses at most, and the entire family having to try and occupy that space without a sizable plot of land around them where they can continue to farm and cultivate or build other structures which are appropriate for the cultural norms of the family, as it were. And then, of course, you mentioned as well the affinity or the connection that people have to their land. And that certainly hasn't been understood as well through the development of this project. I mean, there have been instances where graves, ancestral graves, and important cultural sites have been excavated, dug up, exhumed, and moved. Cultural sites have just been desecrated. And there's been no compensation for that. No concern around the psychological, cultural trauma, that comes as a result of just uprooting people, uprooting their entire histories, their entire ancestry and their relationships to land and to each other, uprooting it in that way to just make way for a oil pipeline. And what to make matters worse is that the oil pipeline that they're making way for is not one that is going to lead to any meaningful economic development in the project host countries of Uganda and Tanzania. It really is, just another extractive project which will benefit the West and others in imperial and sub-imperial countries, and leave ordinary Ugandans all the more poorer because of its impacts on, Uganda's main industries are fishing, agriculture, and tourism. And the implications of these mega oil projects in Uganda, in its most pristine nature reserves. I mean, Total is currently drilling in the Murchison Falls National Park. That has huge implications for those industries, for the jobs and the livelihoods of ordinary Ugandans. And the little revenue that the Ugandan state would bring in from the pipeline would really just go towards servicing its debt. So really what you have is exactly what's happening in Nigeria, where these oil projects are being pursued by multinational corporations. The benefits, the energy security, all of that is going abroad, going overseas, and the host country for these extractive projects are just using it to service their debt, and are not generating meaningful income to invest in social development initiatives and all of these things.
And sadly, that land that you talk about, I'm actually horrified when you speak about these pipelines going through a nature reserve. It's going to take years and years and years to rehabilitate that land. And like you also rightly say, I guess it's almost as if these governments of Uganda, Tanzania, and whichever other countries are involved, actually have a gun held to their heads, because this is really about repaying their debt to these foreign countries or foreign governments. That being said, and the other very important issue that you mentioned was the rights of women, completely trampled in this whole, in this whole event of chasing after oil. It's all about greed, control, and money, obviously. And if that particular household or that particular community, extended community, have more females, because traditionally on the lands you find the females working the land, the farms. If they have more females and only 2 or 3 males heading up that household, the poor women once again are plunged into poverty and hardship. And if these male members, squander the money or run off with the money, they are really left with absolutely nothing at all. Let's wrap up and ask the all important question. The global north has a huge focus on, obviously, renewable energy. Our own government, Cyril Ramaphosa, keeps talking about the just energy transition. So, if the entire global north is going that route, why are they raping the African lands with all of their excavations and running pipelines? They're even doing it offshore. And we've had many other activists like yourself raising the flag and making their voices heard on these matters.
Yeah. So look, really what it boils down to is that the imperial countries, the Western countries, the broader so-called global north is using Africa and other countries across the global south as a gas station, as a garage, as a pit stop on their way to renewable energy. And they are extracting and exploiting as much as they can, not just from our natural resources and our land, but from our people as well, relying on the global system, which enables them to benefit of the extreme poverty and hardship that our people are subjected to, and exploiting that in order to get them the resources that they need to advance technologically, and to implement at least the transition. Of course, it's another question when we talk about a just transition. I mean, what Cyril Ramaphosa envisions is in no way just. When we talk about a just transition, we absolutely need to look at the ownership model, and where the real true benefits of these projects are going, and of course making sure that no one gets left behind. But look, in the African continent, we should be moving in that direction as well. We absolutely should be. And we have immense potential to utilize the sun and the seas and the wind and the rivers to generate the electricity that we need, not to then be exporting and all of this thing, but first and foremost to make sure that the 600 million people on the African continent who don't have energy access get energy access as a starting point. And that's what communities are calling for as well. They're saying we want decentralized, socially owned, renewable energy systems. And it is entirely possible for African leaders, African governments to begin implementing those things. But what is required is a revolt against the global system. And our African leaders across the continent, I mean, they should be spearheading that revolt against the global system instead of being entirely at the mercy and at the service of it. They should just simply flat out refuse to pay this debt that the Bretton Woods institutions, the IMF and the World Bank and the likes have imposed onto African countries. And we should be saying, cancel that debt, we're not going to pay it, and demanding reparations from the former colonial powers and the current colonial powers, in fact, as well, and from these multinational corporations and from finance capital, and using that, while also at the same time regaining control and regaining ownership of our natural resources, our abundance of natural resources on the African continent, in order to generate the revenue and the income that we need to implement a deep, just transition here on the African continent. And without that kind of absolute rejection of the global system, we are then destined to continue being this gas station, to continue being exploited and used, and it will get to such a point where it is too late to reverse, and it's a scary reality that we are confronted by a crisis.
Okay, my next guest is standing by. So very quickly, I'd like to wrap up. A short, sharp answer. Do you believe organizations like yourself are beginning to make inroads as far as these atrocities are concerned on Africa and other third world countries?
I mean, yeah, we're trying our best. So yes, but there's a lot of work to be done. And so simply what I'll end on is just to say that what it takes is ordinary people, all of the listeners, all the viewers of this, to reach out and to get involved as well. Because it is that collective power of us ordinary people, working class people coming together and finding our strength where we'll be able to make meaningful change.
Zaki Mamdu, keep up the amazing work. We need your people's voices and your strength behind all of the atrocities and all of the land thieving and everything else that goes on in Africa. I mean, whilst you were talking, I was thinking about the story of the blood diamonds, but we leave that for another conversation. Thank you for being with us on the show this morning. Allah accept all your efforts. Assalamu alaikum to you.
Alaikum salam. Jazakallah for having me.
That, of course, was Zaki Mamdu, coordinator of the Stop EACOP campaign, and standing by now to talk with us is Nawid Mohammed, a fund development team lead at Islamic Relief South Africa, and we are going to be looking at the voices of Gaza. So please do become a part of the conversation.